with some geezer next to him. The interesting thing about Klaus Schmidt is he's a very forward-thinking man, and he's quite happy to associate the builders of Göbekli Tepe with mythological stories of the past. For instance, he suggests that it may well be the case that Göbekli Tepe and the mountain on which it's placed was remembered and passed down from one generation to the next until it eventually found its way into Sumerian tradition and became the sacred Duku mound, the mound of creation, which is also known as Dilmun, the area, this mound or sacred mountain of Dilmun, also known as Karsak, which was considered to be the place of the gods, where the gods lived before they came down to help humanity create the first cities. This is what Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian and Babylonian mythology tells us. And these gods were known as the Anuna or the Anunnaki. And Schmidt is willing, and has put this in his book, which is a pretty scholarly book, to accept that the builders, the Göbekli builders, may well have been the original source behind the Anunnaki. And that's great, because that's exactly what I said before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in From the Ashes of Angels back in 1996, which was weird because I was writing that book in 1994 and 1995, the exact time that Klaus Schmidt was putting the spade into the earth for the first time at Göbekli Tepe. Nicely, weirdly fortuitous. So, but he goes further than that, because in an article that appeared in 2007, he did actually link the Garden of Eden with Göbekli Tepe. Now, he later withdrew those statements. And they were actually recorded by a British journalist by the name of Sean Thomas, who writes under the nom-de-plume Tom Knox, and he wrote a book called Genesis Secret, which was a very gruesome novel that came out a few years ago, and it was me who actually gave Sean Thomas the directions to get to Göbekli Tepe. And when I actually met Klaus Schmidt last year for the first time, I actually apologised to him for introducing him to Sean Thomas, because Sean Thomas's article, which basically said that Schmidt says this is the Garden of Eden, caused Schmidt a lot of problems. In fact, there were even suggestions that the concession to dig there was even going to be taken away from them, which is one of the reasons why he's withdrawn away from that idea. And yet the link was made, and it made other people think, yes, just maybe this is the original place of the Garden of Eden.
I think there was a 9 o'clock bells out there, so you know.
Right, okay, is that good or is that bad?
Depends how much you got.
Right, well, I'll a little bit to go. Anyway, Eden itself, as I said, is probably a little bit further north. Göbekli Tepe is here. The main area of the Garden of Eden, the terrestrial paradise, is where all these rivers come together here. Here's Lake Van, the big inland sea. However, this is one of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe. It shows a vulture. The vulture is the primary symbol of death and rebirth in the early Neolithic. And there's a lot of suggestion that shamanism was important at these places like Göbekli Tepe, and that vulture shamans may well have played a role. Why was vulture so important? Because of the act of excarnation. This is the placement of bodies to be disfleshed on the top of these towers, which later tradition amongst the Zoroastrians and the Parsi referred to as towers of silence. And in fact, the Zoroastrian tradition almost certainly goes back to the Neolithic. The Zoroastrians obviously being in Persia and eventually through the passes into India. And at Çatalhöyük, the Neolithic city in southern central Turkey, which is a couple of thousand years later than Göbekli Tepe, but is unquestionably part of the same culture, a number of the vulture murals there quite clearly show articulated legs that indicate that the vultures are human-like, anthropomorphic. So either they're shamans or they are vultures with a human-like form. And this was an image that was done by the artist Alan Sorrell to accompany an article or a paper about Çatalhöyük that showed these vulture shamans, because this is the form that the shamans would seem to have taken to travel into the next world, from this world into the next world. And so this was the garb that these early figures, these prime movers in these Neolithic centres like Göbekli Tepe and Çatalhöyük would seem to have taken. They adopted the garb of the vulture, and various paraphernalia has been found at sites in this region to confirm this fact. And this was discovered very close to Göbekli Tepe, and it actually is a weird figure that's actually not wearing, but actually has a double wings, or a pair of wings, I should say. And are we looking at the at one of the prime movers, the elite behind the construction of these sites? And is there a link with the Watchers of the Book of Enoch? Because the Book of Enoch and various other examples of so-called Enochian literature, in other words, those that seem to have come from the same stable, talk about the Watchers adorning themselves in cloaks of feathers or becoming birdmen and flying around, suggestive very strongly of shamanism associated with birds, and possibly birds wearing dark garments, of iridescent feathers like those of the vulture or carrion birds in general, which were those that were connected with excarnation. So, in my opinion, and this is something that obviously I said as early as From the Ashes of Angels in 1996, I think these vulture shamans were, or are, the Watchers of the Book of Enoch. I'm pretty certain of these. These were the prime movers. So why is it even important to this story? Because the stones, and back to our friend Klaus Schmidt, in 2007 he actually said that the stones were erected for the watchmen of the period. This is watchers. I mean, one of the terms that's actually used in the Book of Enoch for the watchers is the watchman. It's just another form of the same name. So he's implying here, whether by accident or design, that those who constructed Göbekli Tepe were the watchers. So the Book of Enoch, the earliest form found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Watchers, angels lived together as a community in the terrestrial paradise Eden. Well, we know that from the stories of the Book of Enoch. The Watchers fell because they gave mortals the arts and sciences of heaven. Is this a memory of the Neolithic Revolution? Absolutely. The Watchers fell because they gave mortals the arts. It's the same one. Right. Birdmen are the shamans adorned in the coats of feathers, as we know this. The Göbekli builders were a priestly elite and shamans. Is this what the creators of Göbekli Tepe looked like? Did they trigger the Neolithic Revolution? Well, this was the image that was done for my book, The Ashes of Angels, by the artist Billy Walker-John, sadly no longer with us. But this, if you look online for images of the Watchers, this is still the only one out there ultimately. And, even today, to me, it still gives me slight shivers when I look at this image. Because when she first presented this to me, I just thought, oh my God, she's encapsulated this idea absolutely perfectly. The Watchers were described as extremely tall, like trees, this white skin, elongated faces described as visages like vipers, and wearing these bird garments. To me, that absolutely encapsulates it. Come on to that. And the Watchers also described as serpents, Owen, and there's repeated reference to their connection with serpents, and I think that this has got something to do probably with their actions as shamans, you know, that the serpent being a prominent symbol of the of hallucinogens and the connections with the other world, but I think it's got a lot to do with their appearance as well. I think they had extremely elongated faces, probably because they were of a people that came into the region and looked different to the locals of that period. Now, exactly what the differences were is a matter of speculation. But what we do know is that the peoples that followed after the early Neolithic in the Near East, the Halif culture, and after that the Ubaid culture, seem to represent figures connected with their mythology that were clearly serpentine in appearance. These have often been described as lizard-like, but I think that they're purely serpentine. And these were placed in the graves of Ubaid burials from around 4,000 BC. And I think that, you know, these perfectly encapsulate these idea of these ancestors or gods, you know, having this serpentine appearance. And one thing I've probably not mentioned here is that this connection between Shanlufa and the idea that it was founded by a son of a serpent is some memory of this same tradition, particularly as a settlement of the same culture from Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered in Shanlufa, right in the oldest part of the city, right next to the pools of Abraham. That's really interesting. So, okay, were these original Göbekli builders not just the Watchers but also the Anunnaki? Absolutely, I'm sure of this. And there are a lot of traditions within Sumerian myth that the gods came from the north, from a mountain, as I said, called Dilmun or Duku. And, you know, if we're trying to create an image of exactly what these people look like, I have others which I will reveal at the Questing Conference for the first time, or with myself and Russell over here have tried to reconstruct what we fully believe these Göbekli builders look like. But for the moment, this will do. These weird albino-like, because the Watchers were described as having, you know, white hair, like albinos, and this image of this Asian albino figure, you know, somehow fits and relates in some way. You know, so did the architects of Göbekli Tepe look a little bit like this? The answer is yes. But where did the Göbekli builders actually come from? Well, I don't believe that it was the area of the Near East. I think that they came from much further afield. And I've made some suggestions here: Siberia, Northern Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia. And in my earlier books I talked about them possibly coming from Egypt. I realise that that's now just a small part of the picture, and that the prime movers probably came from another part of the ancient world. But that's something that I will reveal at the Origins 2013 conference on the 16th of November for the first time. I'm not going to go into that tonight. But why did these people come into the area of the Near East? What was going on? Well, in 10,900 BC, there was a major catastrophe in this world. It involved almost certainly a comet impact. The date that has been now pinned down is around 10,900 BC, and it affected large parts of the world. And you might say, well, hold on, isn't that a long time before Göbekli Tepe? Well, no, because this wasn't a single event. It's a fact that there were lesser events going on for several hundred years after this time. Possibly other cataclysms, fires that were engulfing parts of the world for hundreds of years afterwards, periods of darkness, the onset of a mini ice age known as the Younger Dryas. This was a terrible, terrible time to live in this world. And after everything calmed down, at the end of the Younger Dryas, around 9,600 BC, boom, Göbekli Tepe suddenly appears, there is not a coincidence. And as I have said now before, and I repeat again, Göbekli Tepe is part of a response to what happened in the world, the bad things that have happened. That's why the first monumental architecture in history is suddenly thrown up. And I don't think it's going to turn out to be the last either. I think you'll probably find that in other parts of the world, similar structures appeared around this same time. And that this is one of the reasons why there was a lot of migrations and movements of peoples going on in the world, because people were being displaced from their own territories and moving into new lands and taking over control of what was going on. And I think that's where our vulture shamans, our watchers, our Anunnaki come into the picture. They weren't indigenous to the area. Those that built Göbekli Tepe were indigenous, I think, but they were given a helping hand by some kind of elite that came into the area. This just shows the layer, the so-called oscillo horizon of thick ash, 20 centimetres thick, that's been found all over the world, corresponding to the date of around 10,900 BC. And this impact also affected the Near East. Evidence of it has been found at a site called Abu Huraya, which is just a few hundred miles from Göbekli Tepe. And there are even legends of a catastrophe in the area of Göbekli Tepe, which I bring out in the book about Göbekli Tepe. So, you know, all of this comes together in that. But there are further links between the Watchers and the site that we originally started with, Haran. And one of the other books to talk about the story of the Watchers is the Book of Jubilees. Dates to a similar period of time, also found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it tells the story of the Watchers, but it also relates how Canaan, the legendary founder of Haran, according to Hebrew tradition, uncovered an inscription carved on a stone stela, and that when translated it was found to contain the antediluvian science of astrology as taught by the Watchers, and that this then became the teachings of the Sabians, the Chaldeans of Haran. So basically what they're saying is they found this stone stela that revealed it. Now, Göbekli Tepe, the stones there are all very much associated with astronomy and all the rest of it. Now, Canaan's father was a guy called, let's see if we can pronounce this, Arphaxad. Yeah? The father of Canaan was seen as the progenitor of Chaldeans, i.e. the Sabians, the star worshippers of Haran, which is, you know, another link with the place. So did that knowledge come from Göbekli Tepe? Well, I think the answer is going to be yes. Were the Watchers the first gods of Göbekli Tepe who revealed to mortal kind the arts and science of heaven? Absolutely yes. Are they represented by the T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe? Yes. So that's about it. Coming soon, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, my new book out beginning of next year, 2014. We're doing tours of Eden, the Garden of Eden, and Göbekli Tepe in, it says 2013 there, but it will be 2014 now, because we did one, a very successful one this year. So if you're interested in that, contact us on andrewcollins.com, and that was the one that we did this year. And if you like what you hear tonight, come to the Origins 2013 conference, Steiner House, London, November 16th, and you'll hear from myself on the subject, from Graham Hancock, Robert Bouval, Hugh Newman, Caroline Wise, and many other activities going on as well. So we'll see you there if you can come. So with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you.